Story 1. A Clockwork Orange with my Asian grandmother. I was in high school and all I knew was that it was a movie based on a book that was sometimes required reading at school. I assumed it would be similar to The Great Gatsby. Story 2. When I was about 12 or 13, my mother kicked my father and me out of the house for a gathering she was having. We decided to go see a movie. We were late, so we had to sit in the first few rows. The movie was Something About Mary. I think I died a little during the bathroom zipper scene, and it just got worse from there. Story 3. Borat with my dad when I was 15 in a completely empty theater. It would be fine today, but at that age I felt very uncomfortable. Story 4. I suggested to my parents that we watch Parasite. It was all good until the scene when the children are outside, and the mother and father think they are alone. Story 5. 8mm film with my dad at the theater. I was a teenager. We had no clue what it was about. I wanted to die. When we left, he said, "I think that is a good depiction of sin in the world today." Story 6. Y2 Mama Tambien was in theaters with my mom right after I graduated high school and before a road trip with a couple of my friends. Awkward. Story 7. I took my 13-year-old to see Ted. The one time I did not know what the movie was about. He was banned from picking movies after that. Story 8. The description said it was a butter carving contest and was rated PG-13. They failed to mention the lesbian sex, nudity, and extensive swearing. I learned afterward that they miswrote the rating. I watched it with my parents and siblings when I was 12. Story 9. My brother-in-law is married to someone who did not grow up in America and had never seen a Disney movie. In 2021, my father-in-law died, and we all contracted COVID-19 at the funeral. We had to quarantine together for a week. To pass the time, she suggested we watch all the classic Disney movies she had never seen growing up. She asked if we could watch The Lion King first. I turned it on because I had completely forgotten the key plot point about Mufasa dying. When I watched it with my grieving husband and his family, you could hear a pin drop in that scene. I have not watched The Lion King since. Story 10. I remember being maybe 11 years old when the movie American Pie came out. I don't know why, but thanks to the universe, my grandparents came to visit, and we all decided to watch it as a family. I'm sure they didn't realize what it was about, or my parents were cooler than I remember. My sisters and I had pallets on the floor, like every Friday night when we would rent a Hollywood blockbuster film. Every Friday night, I would do the exact same thing that I'm about to share because I thought it was a new thing and was raised in a very Christian family who had no sex education. This thing was masturbation. I did not know it was something everybody did, so it's something that I did often, particularly on family movie nights because I was nice and cozy under a pallet on the floor in the living room. So I did it unknowingly, very openly under my little blanket pallets on the floor. Often. Again, because I just didn't know that it was a sexual private thing. Anyway, we started watching the movie, and the scene where the young man is masturbating and his grandmother walks in and has a heart attack. Yeah, my grandma, grandpa, and parents started laughing hysterically and said, "Oh, that reminds me of someone." My whole family laughed while my mom gently kicked me on the shoulder as if giving me a hint. I remember my heart sinking and realizing that this was something everybody did, and I had just been doing it openly in front of my family with zero idea. And that's how I learned that everybody masturbates. That memory is one of the most embarrassing moments of my life and still makes me cringe. It was definitely the most awkward movie I've ever watched with my family. I remember literally freezing from embarrassment and pretending to go to sleep for the rest of the night. Story 11. Movie. Silence of the Lambs on a first date with a boy I knew from high school. Very awkward. Show. Visiting my very religious uncle who moved across the country decades ago and watching Seinfeld. The episode where Elaine dates a saxophone player who doesn't know how to perform oral sex. So she makes him practice until he gets it right. His face was numb and he totally bombed an important audition. Also very awkward. Story 12. We Are the Millers. I made my family go for my birthday. This was during the summer my mother asked for a divorce. It was awkward on many levels. Story 13. I watched Anora with my brother and cousin. We knew it was rated R, but we thought it would be more like Hustlers. Never again. Story 14. Turned on an episode of South Park at my mom's house. Thought my older siblings might enjoy the crude humor. It was the BB's Boobs episode. I flipped over just as BB was complaining loudly that Wendy called her a slut with a huge gaping vagina. So much for that. Story 15. Turned 13 on the release day for National Lampoon's European Vacation. Saw my first PG-13 movie and my first big screen nudity with my dad. Yikes. Story 16. 15 years old and sitting next to my mother when Michael Corleone's new bride gets naked, with one of my friends kicking the back of my seat. Story 17. I stopped by a friend's house to wait for him. I ended up stuck with his mom while the movie star 80 came on. It's about a scumbag who grooms a girl from a Dairy Queen, sends her nude photos to Playboy, marries her, and tries to cling to her when she becomes Playmate of the Year, 1980, and starts acting in movies. It ends with murder, rape, and suicide. There is a lot of sex, cocaine, and a creepy Eric Roberts. My friend never showed up, and she and I watched it in silence. Story 18. My mom may have been the most sexually repressed individual in history. She had absolutely zero comfort with any body exposure or sexual discussion. She and I saw 3 movies together as I was growing up. Life of Brian. She thought it was a Monty Python film, which it definitely was. It included full frontal male nudity and obvious sexual references. Slapshot. She knew the language would be strong, but since I played hockey, she thought she would take me to a hockey movie. This was my first experience with female full frontal nudity and a lesbian sex scene. All that jazz. The film contained nudity including nude female breasts, a male ejaculation scene, and many other nude scenes during one of the Foss dance sequences. My poor mom could never bring herself to talk about any of these. It must have been very difficult for her. I was 12, 13, and 15 years old in these formative years. These remain 3 of my favorite movies, great films, all of them. Story 19, Showgirls with my father at the movies. I told my father that the acting was poor. He said she had a nice body, though. Gross. Story 20. My father was an alcoholic all of his adult life and left my mother for his mistress when I was 4. I did not see or talk to him for most of my childhood, but he reached out to me unexpectedly in my early teens and wanted to travel across the country for a visit. We spent 3 or 4 incredibly awkward days together, usually with a girlfriend of mine tagging along for emotional support, and did typical things like go to the mall and see a movie. What movie, you might ask? A safe choice, of course, a feel-good romantic comedy starring Julia Roberts and Richard Gere, Runaway Bride. What could possibly go wrong? Fast forward to Julia Roberts' character picking her drunk dad up from a bar, or the scene where she tells him, "You may not like that you have a daughter with problems, but guess what? I don't like that I have a father who's drunk all the time." I still feel waves of discomfort thinking back to that moment in the theater, paralyzed in my seat, wondering if the stranger sitting next to me felt anything resembling self-awareness or remorse in that awkward moment. I saw him only a handful of times after that, always years apart. He was a drunk until the day he had a stroke and was found half alive on his bathroom floor. He spent the last month of his life sober, eating sludge through a tube in a hospital bed. Runaway Bride remains one of my favorite movies. Story 21. Tropic Thunder in the theater with my grandmother and great-aunt when I was 11. I chose the movie from the newspaper, knowing only the cast and that it was a comedy. We left about 15 minutes in. It was mortifying. Story 22. Back in the days of Blockbuster DVD rentals, my husband chose After Dark My Sweet to watch with his parents and extended family. It seems obvious given the title and the picture, but he had heard it was good. Instead, it was awkward. Story 23. Watched Shoot 'em Up with my dad. The scene where Clive Owen guns down several bad guys while simultaneously being intimate with Monica Bellucci was painfully awkward. Story 24. I was a cheerleader with my mom and younger sister when I was in older elementary school, between ages 10 and 12. My sister would have been between 7 and 9. I know it was around the time the movie Bring It On was popular because my sister saw it at a video rental store, and my mom barely glanced at it and thought it was similar. I'm pretty sure we got much further into the movie than we should have before my mom realized what was happening and turned it off. Story 25. Sunshine Cleaning was marketed as a black comedy, but it is not. We kept waiting for the humor, but instead it was just bleak. Really bleak. This felt extra awkward because we had just lost my father to a long fight with a terminal illness and another family member to suicide a few months earlier. While our family has always enjoyed black comedies and isn't shy about the subject of death, that movie was more depressing than we wanted to experience as a group. It is definitely more of a watch alone and cry alone kind of film. I wasn't allowed to pick movies for movie night for a few months after that one. Story 26. Brokeback Mountain is not an awkward movie, of course. The endless gay jokes my mom made during the entire film made me cringe. I was just a 17-year-old girl trying to enjoy a cinematic masterpiece. Story 27. I made my mother watch Requiem for a Dream with me. I do not know why. To her credit, she was a trooper and did not say anything until the intimate scene. Story 28. I went with my father and brother to see Scary Movie, especially the entire scene where Cindy and Bobby are together. I wanted to melt into my seat and disappear. Story 29. Black Swan with my mother-in-law. There is a scene that made me want to shrink into the couch. Oh, and Jackass Forever with my kids, ages 6 through 11 at the time. It had much more explicit content than the earlier Jackass movies. We excused them from the room when we realized it was not just the opening scene. Story 30. Reefer Madness when I was 16. My dad was a customs agent on a military post and liked to brag about what he seized from the enlisted guys, mostly kilograms of items hidden in stereo speakers. In the 1970s. Story 31. When I lived at home, I was watching the movie Private Parts, the Howard Stern movie. My mother walked into my room during the scene where Howard gets the woman to orgasm while sitting on a speaker. If that was not awkward enough, she stood watching until the scene where the adult film actress demonstrates fellatio on a sausage with whipped cream on the tip. Story 32. My mom and I watched Natural Born Killers. She was the quintessential nice Christian lady, genuinely kind. Story 33. My parents took my friend and me, both 13, to Scarface. They did not say a word as we left the theater. Story 34. Not a movie, but I watched Triple H share an uncomfortable moment with my parents once on World Wrestling Entertainment programming. Looking back, that was very awkward. Story 35. Quills with my dad and Happiness with my mom. Both movies we went to see based on the actors involved, knowing very little about Quills and nothing about Happiness. Yikes. Story 36. Waiting. I thought it would be funny since both of my parents had worked in restaurants. My father found it hilarious. I did not enjoy seeing a man try to make everyone in the kitchen see his genitals. Story 37. Devil Hunter Yoko on VHS. This is relevant because whoever rented it did not check the age rating and returned it in the middle of the movie without rewinding the tape. I'm guessing they panicked and ejected it when things started getting raunchy. The anime is about a girl who has the ability to slay demons, as long as she retains her virginity. The first thing my family saw was a demon trying to take her virginity. I lost my rental selection privileges that day. Story 38. August, Osage County with my mom. There is a tense dinner scene where the oldest adult daughter yells at the alcoholic and pill-dependent mother to eat the fish. I laughed hysterically. My mom did not. Story 39. Thankfully, I did not have to watch it with him, but my then mid-70s parents had the idea in mind that my sister had recommended they see Blue Velvet. They rented it one evening and apparently just watched it with their mouths agape, trying to figure out what my sister saw in it that she thought they would enjoy. Story 40. This was years ago and I honestly cannot remember the name of the movie, but I was watching a Japanese suspense film. I think the plot involved organized crime and a creepy rural motel in the living room. It seemed like a pretty average movie until out of nowhere, there was a sex scene in which the mob boss was with a lady and a soup ladle was involved in an explicit way. Naturally, my father picked that exact moment to walk into the room. He looked at me with a shocked expression and just turned around and walked out without a word. I am cringing to this day just telling the story. Story 41. Not a movie, but when I was 15, around 2004, I tried to convince my mom that there was more to South Park than gross jokes and cursing. She did not allow me to watch it, but of course I had been watching it anyway. I told her there was social commentary and that it was deeper than just talking about poop. I finally convinced her to watch one episode, Woodland Critter Christmas. Story 42, Back to School, the uncut version. It was rated teen and my father saw it on television. The nude scene was cut at that time, and he was completely unaware of it. Story 43. So my aunt is an actress and was going to be on a new home box office show. My grandparents, dad, and I all gathered to watch together. The show was hung. Story 44. My mom took my sister and me to the theaters to see Paul when it first came out. I was about 12 and she was 9. My mom quickly realized it was not a kid's movie. Story 45. American Pie. My mom suggested we watch it after I told her I had never seen it. She forgot how graphic some of the sex scenes are and said, "Maybe I shouldn't have watched this movie with you. Safe to say I will be watching the sequels alone when I get around to them." Story 46. My mom leaned over to me during the opening scenes of Underworld 2 and said, "I remember when we used to go to the movies to watch cartoons. That made it pretty awkward." Story 47. A small liberty is taken here, but without question, the audible gasp from my poor mother's mouth after the opening line, "I got my tongue up this chick's ass," from Diceman Cometh Takes the Cake. Story 48. Not me, but my dad taking my poor mum to the movies. My mum is extremely strict and a Christian. His 3 top mistakes were A Clockwork Orange. He thought it looked interesting. Last Tango in Paris. Dad thought it was going to be about dancing. Jackass. He wouldn't leave until he had finished his giant bucket of popcorn. Mum was crying down the phone, saying how traumatized she was and screaming in the cinema. Poor lady. Story 49. I really wanted to see Shakespeare in Love when I was a little kid. I wanted to back out when I found out it was rated R. Grandma said, "No, we are going to see it." She scolded my older brother for not covering his eyes during the intimate scenes. Story 50. Not my story, but a friend's. They were so excited to see a movie in a real sit-down theater with his mom. It was The Exorcist. Story 51. 1995. Clerks had just come out on video. I watched it with my mom, dad, aunt, and uncle. I was 15 years old. A few years later, my parents came home from seeing Chasing Amy in the theater. They said, "It was really funny. You should definitely see it, but not with us." 2002. Y2 Mama Tambien at an art house theater with my mom and dad. I was 22 years old. The only other people in the theater were a group of 4 or 5 people my age. After the first sex scene, they turned around and looked at me with sympathy. Story 52. I saw I Love You, Beth Cooper with my mother. We did not realize what kind of movie it was, but instead of going to anything else, we sat and watched it to the end. Story 53. Probably 300. There have been other times that were narrowly avoided though. My mom insisted on watching Requiem for a Dream with my friend and me, but she told my mom she would not like it. There was another time my dad was going to rent Old Boy because it is a Korean movie and your sister is obsessed with Korean dramas. Story 54. I watched Natural Born Killers with my dad when I was about 9 years old. I am almost 40 now and still love that movie to this day. It is probably in my top 10 of all time. Story 55. I was about 11 years old, and we were watching Monty Python's The Meaning of Life. It is one of my favorite movies, but some of the scenes are a little awkward. Story 56. My dad took my sister and me to see The General's Daughter when we were 9 and 11. We left during the movie. Story 57. Watching Bad Santa with my dad. After the movie was over and we were walking to our car, my dad said, "I told you you weren't old enough to watch this movie." I was in my 40s. We laugh about it now, but at the time it was very uncomfortable. Story 58. Horrible Bosses with the whole extended family. My brother suggested it, and we did not know what we were in for. Story 59. After my parents divorced, it became clear they had very different views on what was acceptable viewing for us kids. Cue the moment in the video store when 8-year-old me points out The Crying Game and says loud enough to be heard 2 blocks away, "Dad, have you seen this one? It's about a girl with a penis. Story 60. Jackass 1 and Jackass 3 with my dad. I can't remember how old I was, but it was definitely not old enough to be seeing what I saw. Story 61. Watching Old School with both my parents, based on the suggestion of my then boyfriend. The scene with the oral sex demonstration on a banana was the worst. My mom suddenly went to the kitchen to get a snack. Story 62. My stepmom is no longer allowed to pick movies without looking them up. First, we saw The Crying Game, which is definitely not appropriate for parents to watch. Another time, she confused two movies and thought Foxy Brown, a Tarantino movie, was the one with Helen Hunt and Jack Nicholson. No one should have to watch a Tarantino film with their parents. It is so awkward. Story 63, my dad, my 16-year-old daughter, and I went to see a community play. The whole thing was kind of weird, but the true awkwardness was sitting between my dad and my daughter, listening to one of the actors sing into my foreskin microphone. Story 64, 40 Days and 40 Nights. It's about a guy abstaining from sex for Lent. There is a fair amount of nudity and sex jokes, and every time a scene like that appeared, my mom would whisper her feedback and criticisms of the sex act to me, not about the movie but about the actual sex act. I was 13 and we were watching it in the theater. I just wanted to curl up and die. Story 65. I got my parents to rent Clerks when I was probably 13 or 14, and they decided they wanted to see what it was about. Story 66. My very conservative grandparents voiced interest in a true crime murder type show, so I thought I would put on the best one, Mindhunter. I came to regret that very soon. We made it past multiple sex scenes, and they stopped watching when Ed Kemper got into his mother's skull. Not a movie, but still. Story 67. The Wolf of Wall Street with our then 16-year-old son and our daughter and son-in-law. Oh, and Deadpool. Story 68. I made my mom rent Trainspotting when I was 12. She didn't turn it off, but I heard some drug-related conversations. Later, I saw Choke in theaters with my dad. I had forgotten what the book was about and only remembered liking it. He found the movie hilarious. Story 69. Knocked Up, along with my dad, sister, uncle, and cousin. I was a teenager. I wanted the ground to swallow me up. Story 70. I was maybe 12 when I watched the movie Fame with my mother. The scene where Irene Cara is being filmed is probably the most uncomfortable moment I have ever experienced while watching a movie. Still haunts me. Story 71. My mom wanted to see a funny movie in theaters with me. I told her about Tropic Thunder and how it starred Ben Stiller, an actor she liked. So we went. Watching that movie with my mom was quite awkward. I even apologized to her halfway through. My husband's parents, on the other hand, think it is one of the funniest movies ever. It is interesting to see two different perspectives. Story 72. This was a near miss, thankfully. I had the privilege of having access to a completely free movie theater on the military base where I was deployed. Every few weekends, a friend and I would go see one or two movies that had just been released in theaters back home, free of charge. We didn't have the full lineup of newly released movies, but anything expected to be popular or related to the military was shown in our small theater. It was there I watched The Shape of Water. That was awkward enough since I'm a woman, my friend was a man, and we were just completely platonic friends. We walked the mile back to our barracks in silence. Before heading to our rooms, we agreed never to bring that movie up again. We also agreed to suggest to our buddies who wanted to see it that it had great reviews and they should watch it with as many people as possible, but we would already have plans when they wanted to see it. We wanted to traumatize as many of our buddies as possible because we walked into that movie with no idea what it was about and did not expect that. Funny enough, every time someone mentioned going to see it, they never brought it up again after watching it. A month or two later, we returned home from deployment, and my boyfriend came to my home state to see me while I was on leave. Imagine my horror when my mom said she rented a movie for us to watch that first night, and it was that movie. I made up an excuse about wanting to visit some friends and told my mom and stepdad to enjoy it while I left with my boyfriend. I had to explain to him in the car that it was a movie about a human woman and a merman being intimate for an awkwardly long time, and we did not want to watch it with my parents. He agreed. My mom and stepdad did not mention that movie at all later that night or ever again. Story 73. I honestly cannot remember any awkward movie moments with my family, but I remember watching Friends as a kid while my dad was reading in the same room. A line came on, "All right, mommies. Take a nice deep cleansing breath. Good. Now imagine your vagina is opening like a flower." My dad threw his paper down and gave me the most disgusted look. Story 74. 21. Jump Street. My husband, me, and two teenage girls who tried very hard not to laugh. He was sinking into his chair. Story 75. A Room with a View. Full frontal male nudity portrayed in an innocent manner. I thought it was a bit of a surprise even for me, and I am not my grandmother. I do not think she exhaled for the entire rest of the film. I certainly do not think she ever dared enter a cinema again. Lesson learned. Do not go to movies with family members just in case. The potential upside of mildly enjoyable shared time and snacks is not worth the potential downside risk. Story 76. Definitely a toss-up between the Happy Time Murders and Sausage Party. I think Sausage Party might have won by just a small margin. Story 77. Spinal Tap. My boyfriend, my parents, and I wasn't old enough to go on dates without supervision. I was 14. We lasted until Big Bottom. No. Story 78. Not my family, but definitely awkward. I worked in a home with a group of mentally ill people. Almost all were very nice. We tried to do activities with them like crafts, cooking, and family-type events. I finished some cleaning in the living room, and several of them were watching a movie and invited me to join. I said sure for a little bit. The movie was Rocky Horror Picture Show, a movie I happen to love, especially the elevator scene. But not so much with my coworkers, and there were questions. Oh dear. We all survived. They had excellent humor as well. Story 79. Gone Girl. I read the book but skipped the sex scenes and forgot how graphic they were. I am an adult, married with children, but I watched it sitting between my mother and older brother while visiting my brother, who lived out of state. There was no escape. I wish we had chosen something else. Story 80. Brokeback Mountain. I was 8 or 9 years old, and my stepmother rented it for family movie night, having no idea this was in the blockbuster days. Story 81. I watched the first Saw with my mother and grandmother. None of us knew how gory it was, so we turned it off halfway through. Story 82. There's something about Mary in theaters. I would have been 15 in 1998, but my sister would have been 10. Story 83. Not necessarily super awkward, but when my father wanted to share the movie Airplane with 12-year-old me, he apparently forgot about the full title flash in the middle. His Christian soul was a bit marred after that. Story 84. My dad and I, his daughter, love watching westerns and Asian martial arts films. Anything from Seven Samurai to old Jackie Chan movies to Hero. One night, we were looking for something to watch, and we found Old Boy. I had heard it was good, and it was until the reveal at the end, which was just gross. We really did not have much to say to each other when it was over. Story 85. Went to see Monty Python and the Meaning of Life as a 15-year-old with my mother. It starts with a rousing rendition of Every Sperm is Sacred, and gets raunchier from there. I love the movie to this day, but it was embarrassing. My wife and I loved The Commitments, which we saw early in our marriage. Later, we thought our musical 8-year-old daughter would enjoy a film about the formation of a band. I remember watching it in growing horror as the endless profanity spewed from every character. 10 minutes in, our daughter turned around to look at us with the most judgmental, disappointed face a small child can muster. She was not amused, and we turned it off. For stars, I recommend this movie frequently. A few years later, we took our now 16-year-old daughter to see a ballet movie called Black Swan. I was sitting next to her in the theater. We have never spoken about this and likely never will. Interestingly, my daughter and I, as adults, have similar taste in film. But there are some things you should not watch with a parent or with a child. Story 86. I was about 16 years old and watching Jackass 2 with my friend in the living room. My parents are very conservative immigrant parents. They walked into the room, and instead of turning it off, I decided to let it play. The scene where the guy sticks his penis in the snake cage before it gets bitten was playing. Let's just say Dad was very furious. Story 87. Zoolander with my grandfather. I did not know about the prolonged threesome sex scene. He is very conservative. Story 88. My mom and I were in Chicago during a tour of potential colleges, and we decided to watch the movie Old School in the hotel room. We had no clue what it was about, but we saw it had funny people in it and decided to give it a try. Story 89. One of my favorite movies is Love Actually. However, there are two adult film actors. It is not necessary and adds nothing to the movie. My grandchildren want to watch it, so I have to get them outside. Story 90. Man on Fire. Not because the movie is awkward, but because my dad swore it was the greatest piece of cinema ever created. I fell asleep within 20 minutes because I was bored out of my mind. Story 91. Not me, but it is so good I have to share. My friend and his grandmother went to the movies and ended up seeing Basic Instinct together. Neither one of them knew what it was about, and he said they walked out looking like they had been through war. Story 92. Black Christmas in a theater when I was 18. My mom actually turned to me and asked me what fellatio was. It was awkward. Story 93. My dad was a huge country music fan and played guitar semi-professionally in bars. He was learning the banjo. The movie Deliverance came out, and as a family, we went to the drive-in theater. Dad really enjoyed the dueling banjos part early in the film. We left in a hurry during the violent part in the middle of the movie. Story 94. Watching Magnolia with my friend, and my grandfather was in the room. Tom Cruise in his Respect the Heart, Tame the Spirit scene. Awkward doesn't even begin to describe it. Story 95. Transamerica with both of my parents on their bed. I was 15 and in a Cover Your Eyes and We Will Tell You When to Look Again family. Also a very religious family, so the messaging was very confusing for me. A good movie, but I definitely had thoughts and no one to talk to about them until I went to college 3 years later. I also had a crush on Kevin Zegers before this movie, and honestly, I should have had a therapist to talk to about the whole situation. Maybe I still will 20 years later. Story 96. My dad took me to see Juno when I was 5. I had teen parents, so I understood most of it, and it was a bit weird. Story 97. In the 1980s, my family would rent 2 or 3 horror movies and have a movie night with popcorn, soda, and cheap thrills. It was a time when you only had the description on the back of the VHS box to decide if you wanted to see it. No internet movie database, Rotten Tomatoes, or Google. We rented I Spit on Your Grave, thinking it was a basic horror movie. It was not. We did not finish it. Story 98. Not a movie, but I watched Mackenzie Phillips' Oprah episode about her incestuous relationship with her father with my own dad. I started watching the episode in the lounge room, and he decided to join me to watch it. I was 16, and it was by far the most awkward experience watching something on television. Story 99. I was 11 and my brother was 13, and our father took us to see the Tenacious D movie in theaters. None of us knew anything about it ahead of time. I remember a scene where they needed to push themselves off the floor by getting strong motivation. I was seated between the two of them and felt very uncomfortable. Story 100. Oh my God. I watched Park Chan-wook's The Handmaiden with my mother, only knowing it was very acclaimed and looked gorgeous. Needless to say, that was an extremely uncomfortable experience. Great film though, I would recommend it. Story 101. Watched Inglourious Bastard with my dad when it came out because we did not get along particularly well, and since we both loved Quentin Tarantino, we went to see it to get some father-daughter time. The scene with the interpreter made my teenage self want to be swallowed up by the earth. I would be fine watching it now, but it was very awkward at the time. Story 102. A history of violence with my grandmother and then boyfriend. It was fine right up until that sex scene on the stairway. I have a fairly liberal family, so my grandmother was actually far more amused by the fact that he was so clearly uncomfortable than she was at all embarrassed. Story 103. I remember watching Willy's Wonderland with my mom and stepdad when it was popular. There is a lewd scene where a man and woman decide to get intimate. My mom decided to leave the room and wondered what kind of movie we had started watching. Story 104. I was with my dad when I was 16 or 17. My dad is a goofball and kept doing a get a load of this kind of thing. As a teen, it was mortifying. My grandma also came in while my friends and I were watching Eurotrip during the nude beach scene. I wish I was lying. We could have killed her that day. Story 105, Quest for Fire. I was around 12 years old. My mom switched the channel at the moment when the guys were running towards the women who were showering. Story 106. My brothers wanted to watch Freddy Got Fingered. I tried to talk them out of it because we were gathered at our parents' house for Thanksgiving, but they insisted. My stepfather walked in at the absolute worst possible moment for a die-hard conservative man. I watched The Truth About Cats and Dogs with my mother. That Where's Your Hand? Scene. I couldn't sink deep enough into the couch to escape the embarrassment. Story 107. As a teenager, I watched There Is Something About Mary with my mother in the cinema. A few awkward scenes there. Story 108. Blue is the warmest color with my mother and brother. There was an intimate scene that went on for way too long before I decided to fast forward through it, and even that took forever. Story 109. Oh my God. I took my very conservative parents to see Step Brothers at the theater. I had no idea it would be so raunchy. We were all mortified. It is one of my favorite movies, by the way, just not to watch with them ever again. Story 110. That will be Midsummer. I picked the movie. 15 minutes into the movie, no one touches the popcorn again, and my brother threw up. Story 111. I watched The Dictator with my aunt, not knowing about the sexual and obscene jokes. The way they portrayed it in those YouTube Shorts clips made it seem like another cliché comedy movie with dark humor about racism, but it had more than that. The silence was so awkward, but it was a good movie. I can't tell if she enjoyed it though. Story 112, Monster with my mom. We had just gotten Dish Network, and she wanted to order a movie. She saw Monster and ordered it despite me telling her, "Mom, this is going to be way too intense for you." She said, "Entertainment Tonight said great things. How bad could it be?" She tapped out, and for her first ever pay-per-view movie, she had to call and ask for a refund. Story 113, Porky's, 1981. My parents took my brother and me to see it, thinking it was a comedy similar to Airplane, 1980. I was 10 and my brother was 7. It was so awkward. Story 114. My high school sweetheart and I walked in on a group of people in our dark living room watching a movie, including a teacher that both my girlfriend and I had in separate classes. Apparently, we missed about half of it. We did not know what it was. So we sat on the floor at the back of the long room to avoid disturbing anyone. Then it became clear. It was a full hardcore adult film. My girlfriend had never seen a Playboy magazine, let alone an adult film. It was an interesting topic at school on Monday. We never said a word about it. Story 115. When I was a teenager, I rented The Crow, City of Angels. I watched it several times. My father was curious about my newfound obsession and decided to watch it with me. That was unusual. Story 116. I have 2 movies I watched with my mom that were very awkward. I was a teenager in the 1990s, and my friend was raving about a hilarious scene in a movie where the guy gets into an argument about whether inking a comic book counts as coloring. Sounded funny. That movie was Chasing Amy, which I then rented with my mom. When the finger cuffs discussion happened, I wanted to die. Another awkward movie for different reasons was Trainspotting, which my mom always called the toilet movie. Honorable mention. When Scary Movie came out, I thought it would be good to take my 9-year-old niece since she was very afraid of Scream. I hoped it would help her see it in a funny light and be less scared. Then there was the strange bathroom, glory hole, and penis through the head scene. Story 117, Jarhead. That opening scene of him going to town jerking off in the shower was awkward. I was 19, but it was still uncomfortable. Story 118. I saw 300. Rise of an Empire with my father in theaters as a teenager, so the angry scene was awkward. Story 119. 4-family movie night in 6th grade. My mom picked Fargo, thinking she would tell me and my sister to look away during the partner in the wood chipper scene. She forgot about all the other violence and sex scenes preceding it. Story 120. I don't know the name of that movie, but I remember it was a Bollywood movie. We were watching it and there was no sex scene before. Suddenly, the main hero was having sex with a creature girl because she wanted to have babies. The girl was forcing him to be physical. Story 121. One that sticks out is an early 1980s TV film, Something About Amelia. It featured Ted Danson as the abusive father who molested his daughter during camping trips. I was in my early teens at the time but had already been sexually abused by her then husband. My mother wanted me to watch it with her, which was strange because a year or two before, I had finally told her about the years-long abuse. Within days, she decided not to take any action and sometimes seemed to blame me, all the way until I left home at age 20. I don't think she ever intended to use that night as a way to bond or understand me. If you knew my mother, you would understand. She tried to hide my allegations from state authorities when they visited and preferred that I seek help through Christian or religious means, mostly talking to pastors or getting prayed over, to free me from being possessed by a sex demon. Yes, that actually happened, and I pretended the entire time because she and the other women would not let me leave. I was 14 at the time, so that film was definitely very strange. Story 122. My nan was staying with us and she said to me, "There's a Russell Crowe film on later." I replied, "Okay, Nan sounds good." I was assuming it would be Gladiator. I went out for the day with friends, came home, had dinner, and sat down to watch the film. It was romper stomper. Story 123. I took my 13-year-old son to see American Beauty because a reviewer in the local paper said it was a good family movie. When the characters started talking, I began crumpling my popcorn bag in front of his face. Story 124. I, a female, and my two best friends, both male, went to see the Winnie the Pooh slasher film in theaters as a joke. The movie was terrible and we loved it. However, all of the female leads had nude scenes, and I swear none of us could make eye contact for the rest of the night. Story 125. A history of violence. I took my son and 3 nephews. I was mortified. The next day at work, my sister-in-law walked up and said, "So I hear you took my kids to see some pornography. Funny, not funny." Story 126. Threesome. My best friend and I were 12 to 13 years old at the time, and we recognized all the actors from other movies we liked. There were not many sex scenes depicted in the trailer, so her mother took us to see it. Oddly enough, she sat between my friend and me. When it started getting a little racy, my friend's mother angrily whispered, "Who chose this movie?" My friend and I both pointed at each other, like some comedy skit. We finished the movie, but we got an earful on the way home. "Lady, you are a grown woman, and the name of the movie literally refers to a sexual act that 12 and 13-year-old girls had not heard of, thank goodness. This is your responsibility, ma'am." My friend and I occasionally bring up how ridiculous that situation was. Story 127. This was over 50 years ago, during the summer of 1942 when I was 15 years old, with my parents and my aunt and uncle. My parents thought it would be a nice coming-of-age movie set during the war years. It was about a 15-year-old trying to get laid. I was going through much the same thing. The condom purchase scene had happened just a couple of weeks before. My parents sat stone-faced through the whole movie. My aunt and uncle thought it was hilarious. Story 128. Barry Lyndon. With my very proper British father. Or Animal House with my German mother, who thought it was based on the George Orwell classic. We were marched out, held by the wrists. Story 129. There is a story in my family about my grandmother trying to rent the best little whorehouse in Texas. A Dolly Parton movie from the 1980s, but coming home with something similarly titled but very different. I was not there, but apparently she was mortified when they put it in the VCR. Story 130. Watching Titanic in the theaters with my mom and dad. I was in 4th grade, Super Bowl Sunday, 1998. The drawing scene and the intimate scene in the car. Story 131. Borat with my elderly conservative aunt and uncle in the theater. They weren't fans, but it was their pick. I don't know why, but they couldn't really say much about the choice. Story 132. Probably more funny than awkward, but I watched The Human Centipede with my grandmother years ago. Anytime I bring up watching a movie now, she tells me, as long as it has nothing to do with centipedes. Story 133. My father served in the Navy during World War II. I took him to see Pearl Harbor, thinking it would be a historical account of that time. He was not thrilled because I took him to see inappropriate content. Story 134. When I was 13, my mother asked me if I wanted to watch a movie. I said yes. She then asked which one, and I said 21 Jump Street and 22 Jump Street. Well, they are very adult movies with swearing, drugs, and nudity. We still watched them both. But that did not change how awkward it was. Story 135. Hills Have Eyes. The rape scene was definitely what did it. No one spoke for at least 20 minutes. Story 136. A Serbian film. Thought it was a Disney movie. After sitting through an hour of it with my 8-year-old son and my mother-in-law, I figured, well, hell, we're here, may as well finish it. Story 137. I watched Girl with the Dragon Tattoo with my then-girlfriend's now-wife's father. He had read the book, so he knew what to expect. I did not. Story 138. This is why I always check the parents' guide. Also, mine was Dirty Dancing with my stepmom and dad. I was about 7 or 8 years old. What the heck, Dad? Story 139. No movie. I can watch any movie with my family and it is never uncomfortable. Sex scenes do not show explicit penetration. You may see a woman's naked buttocks, rarely a man's, and maybe a breast or two, but it is nothing spectacular or embarrassing. This made me realize that, of all the sex scenes you might want your child to see, although most people do not want their children to see any sex scenes because they believe sex is bad, the ones in movies and on television that are not pornography would be the most appropriate. Story 140. Sausage Party is not for children or teenagers. Just because it is animated does not mean it is suitable for kids. I knew its rating but still found it awkward. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.